Welcome to the Matcha Guardians podcast, brought to you by Matcha.com. Here we focus on the biggest trending health topics of our time, featuring the greatest and upcoming wellness advocates. Now, here are the Matcha Guardians, certified nutritionist Diana Weil and medical journalist Ilara Hadjipateras.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Matcha Guardians. I am Diana Weil, certified nutritionist.
And I am medical journalist and bestie friend of Diana Weil, Ilara Hadjipateras. And today, we thought, what better topic to discuss than the science of friendships?
So Ilara sent me this very interesting article a couple weeks ago in The Atlantic about friendships and that there's actually a science of friendships. So I was actually hoping, Ilara, that you could kind of explain what the science of friendships are, what the Dunbar number means, kind of give us that background, that scientific background.
For sure. So there is this famous psychologist, as Diana mentioned, named Robin Dunbar. And he just came out with a book that was released in 2022. So kind of right after the crazy COVID pandemic shutdown that we all experienced, kind of thinking about our relationships and friendships more than ever. And one of the things he determined in his research is that as humans, we have a limited capacity of how many friends we can have. The magic number, Dunbar's number that he came up with is 150. And then within his book, which I had a chance to listen on Audible, I'm a big fan of listening to books these days. He comes up with, within that 150 group of people, there's all these layers, these circles. We can call them intimacy circles that we have, where, let's say, the circles work where there's yourself and, say, your significant other. That's kind of defined as like 1.5 people. So kind of half of you is your own ego, and then you have your partner. And then the next layer is 5 people. So these are your super close friends. These are going to be your friends you call that are your shoulder to cry on. These are probably the people that you speak to day to day. They probably know what you had for breakfast this morning. Then after that is the layer of 15 people. So these are the people that you're going to go out with on a Saturday, maybe go on vacation with, plan vacations with them. When you go to have a good time, anything like that, that's kind of the 15 good friends ring. Then there's this ring of 50 people, which I like to think of it as like your barbecue people or people that you'd invite to a party or whose party you'd go to, or you'd probably attend their wedding, something like that. So within that group, right, it changes depending on maybe how close you live to that person. You're probably checking in with them at least every few months. And then the big ring is 150 people. And I like to consider that the wedding group or the funeral group. So these are the people that are probably only going to be involved in your life when you have these giant life events, like big wedding party. I don't know if you're going to have a big baby shower or something like that. So it's kind of interesting, right? But obviously, it's not a firm structure. That's one of the things that Dunbar describes in his book, right? It's not like this is a scientific formula of how many friends you should have. But inevitably, I'm like reading this thing and I send the article over to Diana and I'm like, what do you think of this? Like, how does this fit into your life and your current relationships?
Yeah, it's so fascinating, especially because both Ilara and I are in our early 30s. And I think that one thing as you age is that friendships change. When I got married, my husband, or when we were dating, my husband was the person that I spent the most time with. And I evolved as a person. My likes and interests changed. Maybe I stopped drinking as much, stopped going to the bars as much. I got up a little bit earlier. And it naturally started to change the people that I wanted to be with. And, I noticed that circle, without even realizing that this was something that someone was studying, I felt that in my own life. And to be honest, it's been kind of difficult to say, maybe these relationships and these friendships that I had when I was 20 don't fit in my life anymore. And how does that outer circle look like to me? And with the time that I have, who am I going to invest it in? And one thing that I think would be really fun for us to talk about, Ilara, is just our relationship and our friendship and how it's evolved, because we've known each other through a lot of stages of life, but our relationship is also totally different. And there were a lot of years where, we stopped talking, not because anything happened, just because we were in different parts of the world and doing different things. Would you want to start us off by kind of sharing our relationship? What do you think?
Yeah, I'll start it off. So, Diana and I have known each other since we were in our very awkward middle-aged stage of life. I think we were probably around like 12 years old. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's
We
what
were
I was
12
gonna say,
years
12.
old, and the way we met is actually 12, just that peak age, right? Of awkwardness. I think was I still wearing transition lenses? It was a weird time. But we met through our dads. So our dads are good friends. They've done quite a bit of work together. And so we became close because we would do these family vacations together. That was kind of how it started. I think, what was our first trip? Was it Cortez or was it Spain?
We used to go up to this island in Canada where it was just a bunch of naked hippies running around, and Laura and I were 12 and uncomfortable and awkward. And but I don't know, it was we would just go traveling together. And I remember I was sort of shy, and Alara was like, you know, I always feel like you've known who you are as a person, and you've stood really strong in that. And that was something that little lost 12-year-old Diana just really admired. And I would look up to her and be like, she's not afraid to tell her dad no, and like not afraid to get in trouble. And I loved that about you. So I also feel like growing up and being on these trips, especially in some, maybe places that we felt a little bit more uncomfortable, it was so nice to have you to kind of break out of my shell a little bit.
Yeah, I think I may have led the charge in terms of our troublemaking at an early age. And then what was cool is that so I went to Phillips Exeter, which is a boarding school. I was actually a day student at that boarding school. My family lived up in the New Hampshire area, so we were about 20 minutes away from the school. And Diana, who was originally living in Salt Lake City at the time, she also attended a boarding school nearby, Concord Academy, where she boarded. But then it was fun because she would kind of use our home as a home base. And I'd say probably at least once a month, Diana would come to our house for a long weekend, and we'd catch up that way. And I would say at that point, right, we also grew up at a time where we weren't constantly connected on social media. We weren't texting. I mean, I think we both had phones, but we were not texting each other when we were not together. It was the type of thing where we wouldn't spend every waking moment together. We wouldn't be instant messaging each other. But then whenever we'd see each other on those weekends every month or two, we would just kick off
Yeah,
where we left
exactly.
off.
I think Facebook had maybe just come out, and it was still kind of a cool thing. But we had the old phones where every time you wanted to switch the key, you had to press like 3 times. So text messages took a really long time. But then you guys were my family. I would come and hang out with you on the weekends, and I was really homesick. But then things started to shift for us a little bit because I left. I left boarding school. I was too homesick. I gotta go back to Salt Lake City. And then I think it wasn't even like anything happened. We just kind of drifted. Again, it was like we weren't texting all the time. It wasn't social media. So I think, we were on opposite sides of the country, and every now and then we would kind of check in with each other. But it was just sort of like, how do you maintain a friendship across, that many miles? It was really difficult.
Across the country. I think at the time I was playing a lot of field hockey. I was like playing field hockey 7 days a week. So all of my free time outside of school, and by the way, I had school on Saturdays, so it was limited free time. I was playing field hockey. I was going to tournaments. I was going to tournaments on, Thanksgiving Day, things like that. So that's where we also then lost that ability to spend trips together. Because all summer I was going to these summer camps. I was, going to different colleges, right? Already at a really young age, 15, 16, I was starting to figure out, where am I going to go to college? Where am I going to go to play? That became my life. So I didn't really have any free time, and we weren't planning any family trips together at that point. We were kind of in the okay, we're in high school. Now the total focus is on where are we going to college? At least I felt like that's what it was like for me. It was just total focus, eye on the prize, what college, what university am I going to play at, and how am I going to get there? And then, of course, once we ended up going to college, I can't speak for Diana. Of course, maybe I know a little bit more now since we're closer, but I went through quite a party stage in my college years. So I wouldn't say I would be the most responsive of friends, let alone be touching base with, my friend who was halfway across the country, also, at a different university. So at that point, I would probably say out of all of the years we've known each other, we were the most out of touch during our college years. And once again, it's not because anything bad
Yeah,
happened. We were just doing our
exactly.
thing.
But yeah, I don't really like, we just didn't really talk much, and we kind of lost touch. And then I remember maybe a couple years after we graduated, you ended up in Salt Lake City and you texted me kind of out of the blue and you were like, hey,
Yes.
can I come and stay? And we had like 2 days together. And it was one of those, I'm sure that a lot of people listening can really,
Yeah.
you probably have someone in your life that maybe you see them every 10 years or you see them every couple of years and you never talk to them between. And all of a sudden you're in a room together and you're like, whoa, nothing has changed. We are still family. And that was exactly how it was when Alara came to visit. It was just like, I love this girl, and no matter what, like we went through those awkward years together and we're always going to be family. And so we had this really cool moment of kind of reconnection, and we stayed a little closer. Instagram was a thing, so we kind of comment on each other's stories. We both started dating our now husbands around the same time, so we would kind of be like, hey, like you getting engaged, like what's happening in your life?
Yeah, no, sorry. You're just making me laugh and think about how I think one of the Diane and I both are big lovers. We're obsessed with our husbands, which, we will cover on a whole other podcast. I'm sure we're going to have them on here as guests at some point to talk about that. But that was definitely a shared interest that we had, right? Like we both were lovers. We both had these really great relationships. And one of the things we often talk about now is that, especially when you've been in a relationship for a long time, for several years, almost a decade, which is kind of where Diane and myself are at, a lot of people, they go through rough patches and maybe they like bad talking their spouse or their significant other instead of celebrating the positive. So Diane and I would kind of always reach out and bond over just like, yeah, like we're so lucky with these guys. I really, really like them. I mean, I wouldn't mind if they didn't stop dragging their feet and maybe proposed a little bit sooner. But besides that, life is good. And it's funny. So going back to Robin Dunbar's theory, one of the things he says is that when you fall in love, you sacrifice 2 people in that close 5-person circle. So who would you say you sacrificed?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I feel like we met when I was 24. And so it was kind of when I was having this transition of friends sort of naturally, of maybe drifting away from people that I would party with and started more towards people that like, hey, do you want to go on a hike and like wake up at 6 a.m.? And I think that meeting Harley was that was a transition of sort of the friends that weren't supportive of this new person that I really wanted to be. So I think that was for me. But do you have anyone specific in your life that like, oh yeah, this is what happened when you started dating Peter?
Peter I've known since I was 18 years old, but we didn't get together until my early 20s, once I had graduated college. He was one of my brother's best friends from college, which is a little taboo. I know, going for the younger sister. But my brother at the time when we started seeing each other he was all the way in Chicago in medical school. I was in New York City. Peter was in New York City. I had just started a job before I dated Peter at ABC News. And it was, once again, when I go into something, just kind of like with Field Hockey, I go full tilt. It is my life. I live 2 blocks away from my office. I eat, sleep, breathe ABC News. It was all I did. Anytime I had a chance to pick up an extra live shot or an extra shift or work, I would do it. So I became very close with 2 colleagues that I worked with on my overnight shift there. They were like my family. As far as when I lived in the city, I absolutely love them and I got really close with them very fast. One of the things that Robin Dunbar also talks about in his theory is that there's kind of these 7 pillars of friendship. And it's not surprising that one of these pillars of the friendship is just, right, close proximity. Relatability in terms of like suffering. And I guess when you're doing this really hard, demanding job, and these people are working with you day to day, you're going to have a lot of talking points and you're going to have a lot of things that you relate upon. So when I started dating Peter, I kind of felt this fissure with those 2 people in particular, where I started thinking, I have my life, I have my work, but my work, maybe it shouldn't be my life. And I want to start spending my time outside of work with Peter. And then eventually it was like, well, I kind of want to do something different that isn't so demanding, that doesn't take up all of me. And so I shifted away and I stopped working at ABC and I then went to work at a startup and really completely lost touch with those 2 people. Not that they are absolutely wonderful. And I, still to this day, when I think of them, I love them to the bones, but those were definitely the 2 that just pop out into my mind that dropped off when I met Peter.
I think the work friends are so funny because it's like these people know you in and out. They know everything about you. They probably like know the drama in your family before anyone else does. And yet, as work friends, it's like if you leave that job, that relationship tends to be done. I just find that that's such a fascinating thing of these people probably know you on such an intimate level, and then all of a sudden, boom, it's over. One thing about the article that really stood out to me, and this is mind blowing, is that Dunbar said in order to move someone from those outer circles into the inner circle, you have to spend 200 hours in like a pretty close time frame, and that is mind boggling kind of. And it explains a lot I think about why maybe making friendships and close friends as an adult is really difficult. And I'm curious, I just want to hear your thoughts on that. And if you have, like one of the problems I think in today's world and something that I hear a lot about is how lonely people are, that people really are searching for community. And I wonder if this is a barrier and if there's anything that like any advice that you could give someone, or how do we navigate having to spend 200 hours with someone?
So I think one of the biggest challenges of maintaining friendships as we age is just the inability to have spontaneous time together. So in college, it was different. Like it was just different than it is now for us. Like now we have responsibilities, we have commitments, and we follow through on our commitments. And we have to, right? Because we're financially responsible. We have bills to pay. We didn't have bills to pay when we were in college and when we were in high school. We have to show up for work. We can't just skip out on classes like we may have done in our younger years. So it's a little bit different. And I think that as I've aged, and especially when I've experienced living outside of my comfort zone, so say like, right, we have our hometown that we grew up in. There's probably a good amount of older friends that you had within like that area, but people move away. It changes. So one of the things I did recently was I lived abroad. So I lived in Copenhagen, Denmark. And besides my husband, I knew one of his work colleagues. That's it. And we decided to move there 3 months before COVID hit. Obviously, we didn't know that at the time. And so it was a really big challenge in terms of, how do you navigate making friends in a new place during a pandemic in another country that has a completely different culture than yours, that maybe isn't so relatable and is a Viking culture. So maybe it's not the warmest either as someone who's Mediterranean. And I have to say, there were 2 silver linings. So 2 main ways that we were able to cultivate friendships. One of those being through our dogs. So, right, that was something that we did daily, was walking our dogs outside, and you would naturally meet other dogs in the park. I guess this only applies to people that have friendly dogs. Maybe it's not so easy if you don't have the friendliest dog, but I have very friendly dogs, so that really worked to our advantage. And then the second way was I still am, I should say. My husband and I were big workout fanatics, and we met people through our CrossFit gym. Once again, just spending that time day by day, going back to what Diana was saying, as far as the research that Robin Dunbar has done, spending those 200 hours and fitting that into the daily schedule of an adult, it has to kind of fit into something that you're doing for yourself, not necessarily doing with the intention of connecting through friends. It kind of ends up being like a ripple effect, like just a bonus. Like, I'm going to go work out no matter what. I got to walk my dog no matter what. It's kind of just a nice silver lining that you happen to make friends in the process. What about you?
Before we get to me, I remember this is something that I love and I think is also really important for people to hear. You mentioned that you've started playing, is it table tennis?
Oh, yes. So one of the other things I've done is, I had been saying before, I was a big field hockey player in high school. And that's actually one of the reasons why Diana and I fell out of touch, because I just spent so much time doing that. And just playing sports with people, like breaking a sweat with another person, getting your endorphins up, is a wonderful way to create a lasting bond. So I recently took up the last 6 months paddle tennis, which I absolutely love. I usually spend around 2 to 4 hours a week playing, and I've become really close with the women that I play with. And since I've moved back to the US, it was over in Denmark, which is where I started playing paddle tennis. I still talk to one of the women I played with on a weekly basis. I know a lot about some intimate things going on in her life that she just feels comfortable venting to me about, and vice versa. So there's definitely something to be shared when you're doing not only like doing exercise with someone or like an exercise class, but like working as a team with someone. Like the girl that I speak with on a weekly basis, like we were playing doubles against these other girls every week. It was kind of this like rivalry that built up in a really healthy way, in a really great competitive manner.
I actually think that that's really good advice too. And what I want to say that trying something new and going to a new class takes a lot of courage. And so you picking up this new sport isn't like that takes a lot of courage. And if someone is maybe listening to this and wondering, how do I make more friends? I think finding a hobby, learning something new, going to a class is a really great way to maybe bring more people about in your life. And, to kind of bring our friendship story back into it. I think one of the reasons that you and I reconnected is because we were going through these really major life changes at the same time. We were both buying houses, we were both getting married, we were planning weddings, we were talking about babies. We had very similar career paths, and it kind of brought us back together. And now, you're on my favorites list, and I call you first thing in the morning, and I text you every day, and I'm like, hey, this is what I've had for breakfast. But I think it's because we've been able to share a lot of big life events together. And that I think is kind of why we were able to reconnect, which has me thinking, in this article, he talks about how, and this seems very obvious, but, to be friends with someone, you really have to share morals and beliefs and values. And I think our society is so divided. I mean, maybe it's not the most it's ever been divided, but it certainly feels that way right now, I think, to a lot of people. And it just makes me wonder, how do we be friends with people who have different beliefs with us? And if it's a 200-hour time investment, are we going to give those 200 hours to people who have different beliefs? And it's tricky. I think it's a tough thing to broach of like, if someone's on the other political aisle than I am I going to be friends with them? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially if you have a long-standing history with a friend. Say it's like a friend from back home when you were in middle school. Does the 200 hours that you put in expire at some point? Does it have an expiration date if you don't re-up?
Right. Like, what is, yeah. Yeah.
Is it like, do you have to kind of do a refresher course? Do you need to put in at least 15 hours, 50 hours? What's the magic number? I think at the end of the day, there is no magic number. It's just a general sense. But going back, right? So the 7 pillars of friendship that Dana was kind of delving into that Dunbar mentions is language, right? Geography, so just close proximity. Educational experiences, right? So, the shared trauma of boarding school. Diana and I share that. Hobbies and interests, moral and spiritual viewpoints, political views, sense of humor and taste in music. And what's funny enough, Dunbar mentions that one of the easiest ways to connect with a stranger is through music.
Oh, that is interesting.
And it's funny because I find myself wondering, is that because maybe, like, for example, you probably have Spotify. A lot of people use Spotify, right, as a way to listen to their music, and they get that the report at the end of the year of how many hours they spent listening to, like, let's just use the example of Taylor Swift because she's everywhere these days. They spent over 500 hours listening to Taylor Swift, and maybe someone that I don't know has also spent 500 hours listening to Taylor Swift. Does that go towards our 200 hours together? It almost seems like it has a bit of that, cause and effect, which is pretty cool, right? Where it's like you kind of tap into that isolation that person spent listening to this song, but it's like this shared experience through music.
Everyone always kind of complains when people throw up their Spotify lists on social media at the end of the year. And I love it because I'm like, okay, how many hours did you spend listening to this person? And what's your personality like? You can tell a lot about someone based on that Spotify report.
I like it. Yeah, I agree with you. I'm all over the place. I mean, especially because Diana and I are both also like on the side. We've taught some yoga. We've done some fitness teaching. And so there's like all types of music that's been played on my Spotify. So we definitely related on that as well. But going back to the political views, in my experience, I think that, yes, you can, of course, be friends with someone even in today's climate, despite having very drastically different political views. But there kind of being maybe 2 caveats to that. One, they're a family member. So you kind of, at least I come from a family where you're not going to necessarily write someone off and stop talking to them over some small disagreement for several years, right? It's kind of an agree to not agree and leave it at that and just kind of avoid the topic. And then the other side of that is maybe it's a friend that you've had for a really long time, an old family friend. and you have a lot of that other shared experiences, educational experiences. You have the same sense of humor. You have the same hobbies, but the politics don't line up. But you have a history. You have like a solid enough history that allows you to overcome their political views. I think that that's really important. And when I think about actually my in-laws, they have a close family friends, I should say, like another couple who they're extremely close with. They go out to dinner, I'd say, every, month or two together. But they have very different political views, and they don't necessarily even avoid talking about it. When they bring up their more extreme political views, the couple that they're friends with, they just listen, and they're willing to listen. And one of the things that couple says is, we just really appreciate you guys listening. Thank you for doing that. Because so many people, the minute we bring it up or this or that, they raise their eyebrows and they're very quick to judge. So I think that when you have a shared experience with friends, you don't put as much judgment onto them. And I think that that's also a key thing in terms of maintaining friendships, is not bestowing too much judgment, right? You just take people at face value. You appreciate them. You appreciate the time that you're able to spend with them.
And I think, and that also brings up, regarding someone with positive intent, if you know someone, you've invested those hours, maybe it's your partner, whatever, that you're really viewing them with positive intent rather than always jumping to the negative. But wow, the power of listening. I think that's just like, that's one of the greatest gifts that we can give our friends.
Absolutely. Yeah. And speaking of one of the greatest gifts we can give our friends is just our attention and our time. And I think that now more than ever, it's quite difficult for people based on how much time per day they spend on their phones. I don't know if, Diana, when was the last time you checked your phone usage per day?
Oh, I immediately get rid of that notification because I don't want to know.
Yeah. I think because I work a lot on my phone, like on Slack and things like that, because we work remotely, I'm around 3 to 4 hours a day. And I don't know about you, but for me, it's a bit of a constant battle, even with my closest relationship, my friendship with my husband, where, I'm on my phone. I kind of seem like maybe I'm socializing on my phone, but I'm actually doing a bit of work. But that leads me to my point of, what's your whole view on social media and social media friendships? Because I know that Diana, she dabbles a bit in influencer work and that realm of the world, and you end up having conversations with people and like direct messages and it seems like full-fledged relationships, and you've never even met the person or spent time with them.
Yeah, this is really fascinating. And I want Dunbar back to be like, okay, but what about the social media world? Because it is wild. And also, I don't know about you, but I have, certain friendships that are exclusively sending each other memes, and we don't communicate in any other way. It's just sending each other memes. And, I think it's one of those relationships where we would probably be in the same room as each other and it would be amazing and it would feel like no time has passed. But our relationship, it's like, I almost feel like it's the lazy man's relationship and friendship now, because rather than having to send someone a text or like, let's, rewind it even farther, having to call someone or write someone a letter, it's like, let me double tap your reel that you sent me and put a little heart on it. And like, that's our interaction for the day. But then on the other side of what you asked of like, I get so overwhelmed with my DMs of just, having conversations and people messaging me. And in some ways it's wonderful because there are these people that I've never met, but I feel very close to, and people's, I know about their lives because I get to watch their stories and we send each other reels again, and it's like, where do they fit in my friendship circle? I don't know. It's very confusing, but I will say, I don't know how that is and where that fits in terms of my 150. But I do feel like the best way to dismiss someone is if you are having a conversation with them and you pick up your phone. It is just like, I think, and it's something that I can work on. I think it's something the majority of people can work on. But I do think it's important to mention that when you are with someone, you probably shouldn't be on your phone. And it is very dismissive. And I think it's like one of the best ways to destroy a friendship. What do you think?
I think it depends on what age you are. So I've noticed, especially with, say, my younger cousins or nieces, it's a bit more common, or it's accepted to just be picking up your phone and be browsing through Instagram or TikTok or whatever platform they're on, and then be kind of in and out of a conversation. Like, it's very socially acceptable. Yes, in the younger generation, I'd say, versus even our generation. I think we're kind of like at the cusp where I think there are some people our age who are quite phone obsessed. But I'm the type of person where, at least when I go out to dinner with my husband, nothing makes me happier than when, say, I go to the bathroom or he goes to the bathroom, and then, we come back to the table and he's just kind of sitting there. He's watching me, walk across the room. He's waiting for me to come. He was just kind of taking in the environment, the ambiance. He isn't, splitting his time to maybe check email or look at a meme someone sent him or connect with someone else, right? He's completely in the moment. Because I think, and this isn't a theory of Dunbar, but something that I've heard is that when you switch your attention, right, it takes time. It kind of takes time for you to reset. There's a little reboot moment. So if I'm on my phone, and maybe people that are younger, they're just like, the buffering time is just better. It's like shorter and they have just a better bandwidth and they can just like switch just like that. I cannot. I'm kind of like one of those people that, like, it takes me about 20 to 30 seconds to fully reset and be like, what's up? Like, what are you saying? Like, yeah, I was completely lost in my phone. I did not hear anything that you just said to me. Can you please repeat it? Versus sometimes I have these conversations with my nieces and I think, oh, they're just ignoring me. They have no idea what I'm saying. And I kind of jab at them. And then they come back and respond to me 4 or 5 minutes later. It's incredible.
I can't wait to see what this generation does when they grow up, like the ones who have always grown up with social media. I think it's so fascinating talking about friendship through the lens of social media, and especially with Dunbar's, circles, like where I feel like I need a whole other circle for just social media friends. But maybe this is kind of where we can finish off in our life cycle friendship, because this is also really interesting, is what happens as we age. And I know in the article, and I actually thought that this was pretty startling, they said that if you live long enough, your inner circle drops to 1.5. And I think that there is such an issue with being isolated as we get older and losing our friends. And I don't know what the answer is to that. But I do think it is really important to be cognizant of our friendships and who is in that circle and how do we nurture them, especially as we get older.
Yeah, and how do we create and actively participate in growing that circle constantly and being willing to bring new people into it? This whole saying of like no new friends, like you're just going to be all alone when you're older, unfortunately, if you're not willing to make new friends. So something interesting that I was reading about the other day is blue zones. So blue zones in the world is often defined as a place where people live to be over 100 years old. And one of the common trends of all these blue zones throughout the world, whether it was in Japan, whether it was in Italy, whether it was right here in the US, is that people tend to be a part of some sort of community. So say it's a woman who's 108. She gets together with this social group every day or, every few days, right? They have that interaction. They're not alone. And I think that that's something that's really important. And just being willing, once again, to maybe try new things, to try new hobbies, to just set aside that time in your day-to-day schedule or your weekly schedule or in some sort of routine way of cultivating relationships. And that's something that we as a society don't tend to value enough. It tends to be a lot of, work. We live to work versus working to live, which is really sad. And it's important to, I think, maintain a healthy work-life balance.
Yeah, especially, when we get older and we retire and we lose those relationships.
Right?
Making sure that we still embrace community and find, maybe instead of doing field hockey, you're doing bingo. Or, not to be like, bingos, but I think you can find different activities as you age, a book club or a walking group or, engaging with your friends' kids or whatever it is. But I do think that emphasizing community, especially as we age, and it's never going to get any easier to make friends. College, I think, is kind of the peak. You're living around everyone who is the same age as you. And I think from there on, it just gets harder and harder and harder. And it's something you have to work at. And I think that knowing that and accepting that and embracing it is really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then I guess another interesting question this like makes me think about is like among our different relationships and our different friendships, what does a healthy friendship look like? And what does an unhealthy friendship look like? Because I think all of us have experienced maybe right? It's a really common word that people love throwing around these days. Oh, it's a toxic relationship. I had to cut that. That was a little bit of health pruning that I did. And I think that COVID was is a hard time, but it was a really good opportunity to do some health pruning in terms of relationships where you're able to have that breather and take a step back and reflect, oh, maybe that person wasn't the best influence on me or wasn't bringing out the better side of me, the side of me that I want to have come out more. Kind of like you mentioned before when you started dating Harley, because Harley doesn't drink. On occasion we have forced him when we've been in Ireland to have like a pint or something like that. But by no means is it, something that he really enjoys. And you stop spending as much time with your friends, say that we're heavier drinkers.
Yeah, definitely. And to be honest, this just makes me think of like, how do you break up with a friend? Because I don't think to be totally honest, there are friends in my life who like, I don't really want to be friends with anymore, but how do you break up with a friend?
Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about, how do you maintain these friendships? How do you grow the circles? But also like, in terms of, like you said, social media, like how many people do you have following? Are you friends with all those people, even though they're defined as your friends? Probably not, right? You're not. You're absolutely not. I mean, according to Dunbar, right? We're way over the Richter scale there, like in terms of being over 150. Most people, I don't know what the average is, but I'd say that a lot of people have over 150 friends on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, like all these different platforms. So how do you go about cutting out friendships? Like, when do you know? Is it something that, I think a common terminology that a lot of people use in romantic relationships is ghosting. Like you just, like at this day and age, right? Because we're not all living in dorm rooms next to each other. We're not going to run into someone in our biology class. Like you can just delete the contact from your phone and just not run into them ever again.
I don't know. I mean, it's it is like, how do we cultivate a good 150 and how do we maybe prune the people that aren't in, and sometimes that's can be really painful. I've had friendships that have ended and it's painful. And even if it was like a good thing, or we just had grown apart, it still is painful. So I think it's also important to acknowledge that things change and it can be hard. And maybe, I probably am a ghoster, and I'm not going to say that that's the most emotionally responsible thing to do, but I don't know. There's a Seinfeld episode of him trying to break up with his childhood friend, and the childhood friend just like doesn't get the memo. And I don't know. I just think it's this funny, like breaking up with a friend is just not the same. It's like, with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, you can be like, hey, this isn't working for me, but it just doesn't feel like you can do that with a friend so much. Maybe we should be able to. Let's normalize it.
I think maybe we should be able to normalize it. I agree. I am definitely in the category that you're in where it's you ghost, because I'm the type of person where I'm very much in the moment in my day-to-day, what I'm doing. I try to live in the now. So it's a pretty easy thing to do, especially at our age when you're not seeing someone on a day-to-day basis or like a monthly basis. It's basically you're running into these people at, once again, the big life events of the group of 150. It's a wedding, it's a baby shower, something like that. But you're not running into them. So it's easy to do.
Yeah. Okay. I feel like we can't end this episode about talking about cutting out friendships. We need to end on a more positive note.
Oh my gosh, I know. Yeah. Friendship. I guess ending with us, like so Diana and myself, going back to our friendship journey. So we finished college, right? College was the crazy years. We weren't really doing too much talking together. And then we kind of reconnected because we both fell in love. And I think that that's really beautiful because it kind of goes against, right? Not everything that Dunbar says applies to every single relationship or different people. And I think what's really cool about Diana and I is that we kind of got pulled back into each other's radars because of falling in love. And we really bonded over that. And then from there, right, we had the shared hobbies. We also had the shared work life. We ended up working together. And when you work with someone, you end up spending a lot of time with them. And Diana became my work wife. She's my partner in crime, which is a really awesome thing. And I don't think that everyone necessarily is lucky enough to have that, where you have all of this shared history and just a really great understanding with someone else that you're working with, but then also you really just enjoy who they are outside of work. And it's really great. And I know that sometimes that can be a rocky experience for some people. Like maybe they create a startup together and things don't work out the way that they wanted it to. But it's a really exciting opportunity, I think. Like when you end up being able to work with a friend.
I think we talk a lot about how we deserve to be treated in romantic relationships and not so much in friendships. And it just made me think about us. I'm going to get emotional. But our friendship, I think especially female friendships can be so pitted against each other. At least that's how they're made out to be. And Lara, you came back into my life in a time that I really needed someone to encourage me. And one of the things that I love about our friendship so much is that I feel like we constantly lift each other up and are always there for each other, and it doesn't feel competitive. And it's like, if there's ever something good in my life, you're one of the first people that I text because I know you're going to be there to celebrate that win, and you're never going to make me feel bad about it. And I guess I think that this is so important, that the same way that you deserve to be treated in a romantic relationship, you deserve to be treated in platonic friendships, and finding someone in your life who can celebrate your wins and will lift you up and embraces who you are. And, you call yourself a golden retriever, and like, I feel like we're just two little golden retrievers that found each other. And I love that.
Yeah, totally. We love words of affirmation. We're golden retrievers. If we start covering all 4 love languages, I mean, we're just lovers. We love it all. And we just sling it back and forth to each other and are at the same frequency, which is just the best. I mean, I feel very lucky to have that. And I think it's really important. I think that Diana and I have also, right, we've both been so invested, and we still are just as invested from the first day of our relationships with our partners, with our husbands. But I think it's important to be able to fill up your cup in other ways besides just them. You can't put too much pressure just on your significant other. A lot of people I know, I love the idea that the person that you're with, that you're married to, is your best friend. But, I think that there is really something to be said for having a community, for having different people to rely on, for having a friendship where you're able to just speak candidly with them and not necessarily vent about your partner, but just have a shared viewpoint in a really non-judgmental manner. And maybe, it's a bit easier to discuss certain things going on in your personal life because, right, I don't have skin in the game. Diana doesn't have skin in the game. And I know, right, at the end of the day, she's going to just make me feel good. She's going to make me feel like myself. She's going to give me clarity, right? And it's really wonderful when you have a friendship where after you speak with them, you just feel clear.
I love that. How about we end this friendship episode with a challenge? I'm going to challenge you, but I'm going to challenge everyone and myself and everyone listening. Here's my challenge if you choose to accept. My challenge is to reach out to one person in your life in a meaningful way. So not just a reel, but like send them a text, give them a phone call, and have check in on your people. I think that that's my challenge. Check in on your people. Find someone in your life that maybe you either haven't checked in on in a moment, or you want to reconnect with, or someone that you talk to every day, but give them a meaningful check-in and not just more than just a funny reel. You can send them the reel too, but then give them like, hey, how are you? How are you really doing? That's my challenge.
How are you feeling? I love that question. That's a question I get asked a lot when I'm pregnant. I've told Diana, I'm like, I don't know why this isn't like a common thing that everyone asks everyone all the time. How are you feeling versus just like, how are you? Fine, good. I'm going to piggyback of Diana's challenge, just because this is something I struggle with myself, is I tend to be pretty good at just reaching out like that out of the blue. Hey, how's it going? Having that quick catch up over Instagram, over messaging. And then I kind of say, hey, yeah, let's get dinner. And then I don't do it. So maybe take it a step further. And if there's someone that say you've been messaging and you've been kind of making those like, oh yeah, let's get dinner plans or let's get coffee, get dinner, follow through on those plans. I think that you'll feel really good about it. And that comes, I guess, back to, at the end of the day, you can control the type of friends that you can be. You decide. You're in the catbird seat. So don't forget that.
Ooh, so good. Yeah, so good.
Well, that's just like Diana and I, we used to go on our trips together when we were younger. And the last 2 years, we were like, hey, let's plan trips. Let's go on trips together. And we've made it happen. And they've been so much fun. Speaking of, when we get off this call, I think that's next on our list. We got to decide what the next trip is going to be. Yeah, if you guys have any ideas, please let us know. And thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Matcha Guardians. And we look forward to hearing from you guys soon. If there's any topics you think would be interesting for us to discuss, feel free to, message us, and we'd love to hear from you. And
Thank you,
look forward to
guys.
seeing you soon.
Sip, savor, and live well with new episodes of the Matcha Guardians every Wednesday. Follow our show for free on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening right now. Leave your questions and comments below. Find us on Instagram at The Matcha Guardians or click on matcha.com.